Hello, welcome back to Catholic Reboot. Today, which is April 28th, is the feast of St. Paul of the Cross. And there's a lot to be learned from St. Paul in the way that he learned to suffer and offer it all up. Um, he was the founder of the Passionist Order. He was born in 1694 and died in 1775. So, of his 80 years of life, they were almost perfectly modeled on the Passion of Christ. And it's one of the big reasons he was given the name St. Paul of the Cross. In his childhood, when praying in a church, a heavy bench fell on his foot, but he paid no attention to the bleeding wound and actually referred to it as a rose sent from God. So you can imagine, as a young boy, he was already heading towards sainthood. As a young man, he wished to be a religious, but his confessor, they said was determined to humiliate him, commanded him to go to a dance. And once he stepped out on the dance floor out of obedience to the priest, the strings of the musicians' instruments broke and the event ended. They were saying there was a clear sign to his confessor what God's real plans were. About this time, he received a vision or a scourge, which uh, what they called was love written out on lashes on him, and he understood that God wanted him to be scourged or him to have his soul scourged out of love. His thirst for penance also needed to be satisfied. So, in the hope of dying for the faith, he enlisted in the crusade against the Turks, which is at a high point at that time. But a voice came from the tabernacle in the church and told him to return home because there was another war that God wanted him involved in, and it was a spiritual one. So, at the command of his bishop, he began, just as a regular layman, to preach the passion and cross of Christ. And it was his intent to determine if he had a vocation. After that, he made a retreat for 40 days in what they say is a damp building outside the church in Castellanzano. And there he wrote for 5 days the actual rules of the congregation he wanted to found, right? Um, then he took a penitential trip across the Appians in winter without a coat, hat, or sandals, and with literally no food, under the obedience of the local bishop. The bishop could not give him the approval or attentions to found an order, and he was constantly being jeered along the roadside. But he said these scoffings were a great benefit to my soul. So while in a hermitage when he was returning to Catalzano, several of his companions came to join him, but in the end, they all left him except his younger brother, John Baptiste. So he decided to teach catechism to the children. And they said when he would preach before the adults, he would kind of keep them spellbound for hours at a time. And he always spoke about the full sanctifying power of the Passion of Christ and would advise them to bear the fruit of the Passion. And this bearing of the fruit is actually what he was greatly known for. So he finally went to Rome to the Pope, who had actually refused him an audience. And it took 17 years before the Pope was to actually allow him to found his order, the Passionists, on Monte Agentaro, which was the actual site that the Blessed Mother had pointed out. Now, St. Paul of the Cross established his order and the habit they wore was like a breastplate, was like a badge, having the holy name of Jesus and a cross surmounting a heart with three nails. And this was all in memory of the suffering of Jesus. But what happened later on, he actually had uh, a heart branded on him, which was later found at his death, right? They said his heartbeat was a supernatural kind of palpitation, uh, and uh, and the heat at times was so intense that it actually would scorch his shirt. He was invited to bear the same kind of secret and more durable sign of suffering that was similar to Blessed Henry Suso, Saint Jane Frances de Chantal, and some other saints. Um, St. Paul the Cross suffered for 45 years from spiritual desolation and significant suffering, which he bore with perfect patience. So, despite 50 years of incessant body pains and all his trials, he read the love of Jesus in all these things, even though demons constantly tormented him, much like Padre Pio. Um, at one time, he was prevented from sleeping for 40 days due to these torments, and he had prayed for the grace of God to give him just 1 hour's sleep, but it still never came. Um, Such was his life. I mean, he was one of the greatest disciples of Christ's Passion. So he died while the Passion was being read to him, and so this was just one final sign that his link to the Passion and Cross of Christ was meant from a very young age. Again, his feast day is on April 28th. So if we ever feel that we're not getting our fair shake, do like St. Paul of the Cross, take on more suffering and be more patient and offer it up for all the poor souls in purgatory. So happy St. Paul Day.